Borough President, and it's my great honor to welcome you to this stunning location. We once again gather to celebrate architecture, and it's so great to see some friendly faces, and I see new faces as well. Do we have any first-time attendees to the conference? Wow, welcome. So I'm also excited to announce that we have continued the record-breaking trend that my predecessor set back in 2022 when we were here before. With record-breaking attendance, we have over 846 attendees this year. Yes. And I'm proud to say that over 50 of those are students. So we welcome students, yes. Each school of architecture from around the state has a student display in the Mediterranean next door. Please take some time to peruse the displays and speak with the students. All right. So before I get started, there's a special person that I'd like to thank. It is my partner in business, in parenting and grandparenting and crime and keeping things on the road. My business partner, my husband for many, many years, Brett Hammond. I get a lot of questions. Do you really work with your husband every day? And I go, yeah, but I like him. Yeah, I like him. It's just he's not my boss at home, and then he's not my husband when we're at work. He's my partner. So thank you, Brett Hammond. So as president, I have the pleasure of selecting a theme for the convention. And this year, in wanting to look at why we do what we do, and remind you of how important the work that you do, and then being able to communicate that value to our clients and building officials, I selected the theme of Live, Work, Play, Why Architecture Matters. As architects, we design the spaces where people experience all moments of their lives. These are the spaces where people live, work, play, heal, learn, worship, and govern. We have a great deal of responsibility with our chosen profession. Our designs not only protect the health, safety, and welfare of the public, but they have great experiences in their spaces. And this is why architecture matters. So let's hear from your colleagues about why architecture matters to them.
Architecture is important because architects design spaces for life from the time that we are born, where we grow up, where we live, where we play, where we learn, where we work, where we heal, where we worship.
Architects matter because they have the capacity, the skills, the tools to envision spaces that don't exist yet.
With architecture, we have music. Without architecture, we just have noise.
Every space has the power to influence the people in it. So a well-designed space makes the world a better place.
It's all around us. It affects how we experience everything every day and every moment of our lives.
If you can design something that, number one, creates an environment that you enjoy, or an environment that's for healing, or an environment that brings communities together, I think it means it's all worth it.
It's important because it's everything. It's all around us.
Architecture is very important. Advocacy is very important because we live, sleep, play, work, do everything in a building. And if it was not important, we'd still be in caves, which we're not.
Having the impact and to influence the built environment, it's just what we do.
It's the space that we inhabit every day. It's the way that people use this space.
It's not just a shelter over our heads, it's also for uplifting our spirits.
I feel like I represent my community, and that's what I want to work for, so that's what I'm here today.
Architecture is basically design, and design is in everything we do in life.
We enhance our lives by making better cities.
Because it's not about what we do today only, but what we impact years down the road.
I think architecture has a way to influence your mood in a really positive way.
Architecture matters to all of us because it impacts our daily life.
Everyone needs a safe space to live, to work, and actually play as well.
Everyone experiences it every day.
Because it's the one way I know I can give back to the greater good.
It's the places where we get together with our friends and our families.
I believe that architecture points toward the higher levels of humanity, and it gives our lives meaning.
It's the basis of what we all live our lives within and brings people together, whether it's through community activities, playgrounds, going to school, shopping centers.
It can tell the story of the client, their functionality, the way that the business operates, all with the way that the architecture speaks to the individual.
It's so important that it even affects in education. It affects the test scores of students. The daylight that buildings are designed around sets the mood, sets our emotions.
It can reflect our beliefs, from spiritual to political to community-wise.
It forms our environment inside and out.
The work that I have to do has the impact to last for generations and can affect so many people, so many more than just me. And so it's important that we protect our profession and continue to practice.
We can create your dream for you.
So, ladies and gentlemen, the work that you do matters. So yesterday we held our annual meeting and our elections. I'd like to congratulate our new officers. So when I call your name, could you please stand? Our new Young Architects Director Representative for Florida is Bryce Bounds, AIA. Is Bryce with us? We have a new AIA National Strategic Counselor in Steve Panzarino. Steve. Our new Associate Director at Large is Sarah Melbranch, Associate AIA. We have two new Vice Presidents, Peter Hauerstein, AIA from Tampa Bay. And Jeffrey Huber, FAIA. Is Jeffrey here? There we go. A new Secretary-Treasurer from AIA Northwest, Ms. Kelly Wazorek, AIA. Got that name this morning. Yes, and then our new President, first Vice President, President-elect for 2026 is Mr. Adam Gale, AIA from AIA Dinsburg. So they will join Associate Director Barbara Hughes. Ms. Barbara, there she is, thank you. Julian Norman Webb and Monty Stark are existing Vice Presidents. And if they're in, raise your hand. There he goes. Great deal, great deal. So I'd like to thank all of our sponsors who make this convention possible. Please be sure to visit the trade show Friday afternoon. Thanks to our exhibitors and sponsors, we are able to keep the registrations to our convention affordable. So thank them and please attend the trade show. The next group of people I'd like to recognize is our convention committee. If you've been able to peruse the catalog, we have star-studded speakers, an incredible lineup of programming, and it's all due to this group of people. So thank you to this group. Adam Gale was the chair, Bill Hercules, Jeff Huber, Steve Panzarino, and Ignacio Reyes were our consultants, our local advisors. Is Francis here? Okay. And Don Yoshino, I know he's here, yes. Amanda Barton, Tyree Boykin, Elizabeth Fleischauer, Arlen Gill, Steve Ruby, Shadi Hamilo, and I know I messed that up, Shadia, Malcolm Jones, Nikki Pareda, and Marjorie Weeb-Reed. Thank you. Another privilege as president that I have of recognizing members who have gone above and beyond with presidential citations. I would like to present my first citation to this year's convention chair, Mr. Adam Gale, for leading the convention committee and developing well-rounded programming for attendees at all stages of their career. All right, that's the best part. That's the best part. AIA Florida continues to be the voice of architecture. As you can see by the year in review, there's a brochure in your chair. We've accomplished a lot since we gathered at our last convention. As a part of my presidency, I appointed a membership task force to make sure we are providing a return on the investment for your dues and how to continue to grow our membership. This group will build upon the work of the previous task force. My first call when considering how to move this task force forward, I had been given instruction that there was a gentleman in South Florida that was phenomenal in doing the membership work down there. I reached out to Jason Hagopian, and he was instrumental in getting this task force off the floor. He never once hesitated, and we talked for, I know, a good 45 minutes, and when the conversation was over, and this was a cold call, he had basically outlined the membership task force for me. So I would like again to present a presidential citation to Jason. Is he here? To his unwavering dedication to growing the membership of our association and the willingness to share all he knows.
You're too kind.
I know, but it was instrumental, so thank you.
My pleasure, of course.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Always.
Yes. So whoever told me that you knew what you were talking about was correct. So thanks, Jason. So once I had picked Jason's brain, I knew who I needed to chair the task force. And it was Brooke Godinez, AIA from Northwest. Is Brooke here? Come on, Brooke, come on down. She has been quite a leader keeping this group moving forward. I'm excited and look forward to what happens in the outcome. So for leading AIA Florida's efforts to promote membership benefits and grow our membership, this is for you. Let's step out here and get a good picture of you. Thank you. Another group for AIA Florida who continues to be future-focused, studying issues that will be affecting the practice of architecture is our Strategic Council. AIA Florida established our own Strategic Council in 2015. The council is chaired by the immediate past president and brings in subject matter experts. Each year, the council has published a report. This year, we paused and examined the structure of the council. I invite Lourdes Solero, FAA, to speak about AIA Florida Strategic Council. Ms. Lourdes.
Good morning. Oh, I don't usually need a microphone. Good morning. Thank you, Rhonda, for the opportunity. As chair of the Strategic Council last year, as my role as immediate chair, I kind of looked at what the council had been doing, and I was a little lost, I admit. And I said, well, let's look to see what the format is, what the composition, what are the deliverables. I kept asking my predecessors, so what do I do with it? And they were like, I don't know, whatever you want. I'm like, well, I need some guide rails. You know, I'm an architect. I need a program. So what we did is we stepped back and said, okay, how do we do that? As an organization, we need to constantly be evaluating what is around us, what is going to affect our profession and our communities at all time. The Strategic Council brings value to our members by evaluating the trends and the issues that are affecting us within the next 5, 10 years, maybe more, sometimes even next week. The council has the freedom to study anything we want to, so what we did is last year, if you recall, we changed the bylaws and took out some of the more constrictive descriptions of what the council was and moved it to the rules of the board. So it was a little more flexible. It can adapt as the time and the needs arise. So we can study anything that we think it is, but we then stepped back and said, okay, how do we help my successors? I was lost. I really didn't know what to do. And when I started really digging to my predecessors, they're like, well, we didn't know what to do either. And we were a little busy the first half of the year with design awards, and then it was like mad rush to produce something. So I said, okay, let's really give ourselves and my successors an ability to really deliver a value of what the council needs to be. So we restructured it to have it only be AIA members. We had tried to bring outsiders in, and they love to help, but the problem is it's not their organization, so they didn't always commit, they didn't always put in the time. So the idea is we will bring them as subject matter experts to help, but not necessarily be part of the council. We also decided to change the schedule. Again, the first half of the year, the immediate past president is organizing the design awards, the nomination, and so it's very difficult to focus on that. So now the new schedule for the Strategic Council studies will begin literally August, right, mid-year, and then it will report to the council, to the conference here every summer. One of the things that when I first became president, I said, well, there's a lot of information of what our councils have done, but nobody seems to know what it is, where it is. So I said we need to always have at least a little presentation at all of our summer conferences to let all of our members know what is the council doing, how to access the report. We had QR codes, if you guys remember, we had reports. So that's really the goal. So then to continue to help that new chair, we developed a strategic advisory committee. And in essence, these are former past presidents who were chair of the councils to say, how do we provide topics? So the idea is that every summer, we will provide to that incoming chair 5 topics that they can pick from, and obviously if they had other topics, that's fine, of things that we think are Florida-centric, that we need to analyze, that we can help the board make their plan at the strategic meetings every fall, and to share with our members. And then that council can only really study no more than 3, otherwise it's just a little too much for it. And so constantly share this with our members, share this with our related organizations. I highly encourage all of the councils that come to find related organizations to share what we're learning. Last year, Steve Panzerino, Ignacio Reyes, and I presented to the Florida Educational Facility Planners Organization what the council had been doing. And they had never heard of it. They were really excited to see the things that we're analyzing. I think this will continue to show value to our members of what the councils can do, how we can help educate not only our members, but give direction to the board as they plan, as we prepare for the future. And this is something that we are implementing, and I'm very excited to say that the hybrid that we're in will now take role, and Beverly Frank, who is the chair, will start her role within the next, FAPAC, sorry. Pull out your, Becky will take money. So it's very exciting to see this, and part of the deal is also that Strategic Council will meet, every committee will meet and give advice every year to the council, and every 5 years we'll step back and say, okay, have we accomplished what we want this to do? Do we need to route that Strategic Council in a different direction, give it more guide rails? And hopefully my successors will be like deer in the headlight. Now what do I do with a strategic council? So Rhonda, hopefully that'll help for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Lourdes, and thank you for your leadership. We have some other leaders in the room that I'd like to recognize. First is the AIA Florida's national president. Is Mr. Jacobs here? Please stand. If you're a past president of AIA Florida, please stand and be recognized. Wow, thank you. If you're a AIA Florida fellow, would you please stand? Thank you. Thank you for your service and your leadership. So today we have the privilege of welcoming a distinguished guest. She has come all the way down to Florida, and I am pleased to welcome, please offer her a warm Florida welcome to our AIA EVP CEO, Ms. Lakeisha Woods. Thank you.
Good morning. How is everyone today? Doing well, doing well. I mean, they closed the blinds so I can't stare out at the beautiful ocean. I thought that's how, it's like I can at least see it, right? Well, I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you all today. And again, thank you, Rhonda, and for all of you for attending this year's AIA Florida Conference. There is no better way to stay on top of your profession than to network and to build your professional support system. I mean, that's what this is, right? This is really what keeps us all going, that support system that we have. I hope many of you were also able to attend AIA 24 in DC last month. How many people were able to make it? Wonderful. Thank you so much for visiting us in DC. It was nice to not have to get on a plane to go to our annual meeting. Once every, I guess, 20 years we get to do that. It was definitely our most spectacular annual conference. But wait until you see Boston, AIA 25 next year. The legendary Zaha Hadid said, "Architecture is about improving the human condition. It's about creating spaces that enhance the quality of life and contribute positively to society." You don't need to be an architect to see the power that this profession has to shape our cities, our society, and our world. So much of AIA's mission is geared towards showing the general public and policymakers at all levels exactly how much architecture and architects truly matter. Now, make no mistake, architects is a revered role in our society. And especially overseas, by the way. Like, architects are held on this tier. It is amazing to see. It is a profession of great respect and prestige. But to many people, architecture can seem mysterious. Many people have never even met an architect. When the average person ponders architecture, what does she or he picture? Onion domes and ornate spires stretching into the sky, palaces and cathedrals and grand cityscapes that stretch far into the distance. Architecture is all of those things, but of course, it is also making sure that a person in a wheelchair can easily navigate a hallway, adding a handrail to help a person with mobility impairment climb the steps, or a guardrail to keep a child from taking an unscheduled dive into the coral reef exhibit. From the very large to the very small, architects make decisions and consider every detail that make us all feel included and keep us safe. Would the average visitor marveling at a grand hotel foyer realize that an architect considered all aspects of the lighting, the acoustics, the ventilation, to make that person feel comfortable and welcome? Architects shelter us, protect us, design the places where we come together, where we create community. It is estimated that people in developed countries spend 90% of their time indoors. Architects anticipate how those spaces best serve us now and 50 and 100 years into the future. So the unseen impact of architects is massive, which is why I completely agree with today's guest, Paul Goldberg, that architecture matters. On a much grander scale, do most people see beyond the glamour of the profession to understand the profound impact you have? Not just on the built environment, but also the global environment. Not just on individual human beings, but on humanity. Two of AIA's key goals within its strategic plan is climate action for human and ecological health and advancing racial and gender equity. Two of the most pressing issues that confront our world today. I believe that architects can be a major part of the progress work towards these goals. We all know 40% of carbon emissions come from the built environment. And I really look forward to that number lowering, by the way, because we just keep saying 40%. We've said it way too long. The world must turn to architects to make significant reductions in CO2 emissions. Architects are the leaders in that space because you have a unique skill set and because you are able to bring all the stakeholders together in a way no other profession really can. That's why architecture matters. The AIA 2030 Commitment Program offers architects a way to publicly show their dedication and track progress towards a carbon neutral future. And AIA's Guide to Equitable Practice, created in partnership with the University of Washington and the University of Minnesota, are a vital part of AIA's long-term commitment to lead efforts that ensure equity, diversity, and inclusion in architecture, so that the architecture profession is as diverse as the nation we serve. It's not just within the profession, of course, but within society as a whole. Architects play a major role in working with civic and community leaders to design sustainable and equitable communities. AIA will continue to tell these stories through our Future Focus video series, our articles, and through its prestigious awards program, to raise awareness, to help legislators, clients, and others outside of our design community understand just how valuable architects are. You are unifiers. You are the solution. AIA is here for you every step of the way to raise your profile, raise your influence, raise your voice, and even help you raise your fees. Thank you so much for making a difference. Thank you for being a part of a profession that matters. And thank you for participating in this convention. Take advantage of this opportunity to share your stories, to learn, to question, and to grow. I also want to express my appreciation for our partnership with AIA Florida and all of the state's 13 local chapters. And I hope to see you, any one of you, at our Women's Leadership Summit in Chicago in October. And of course, at AIA 25 next year in Boston. Thank you again for the invitation, and enjoy the rest of your convention.
Thank you so much for coming and speaking. AIA Florida looks forward to opportunities to collaborate with National, so thank you. So, there are several initiatives that I've championed during the first part of my presidency. They all have had a focus on adding to the value of your membership, frequent and more effective communications to the membership, and increased exposure of K-12 students to the possibility of architecture as a profession. Good. I'm hoping that you had an opportunity to view our first podcast that premiered last week. Thanks to the work of our Vice President of Communications, Mr. Monty Stark, the idea of developing new ways to communicate with you have become a reality. I would like to recognize Monty, if he can come forward. So when I called Monty to talk to him, he was getting ready to go on a vacation. I think it was Christmas to see his grandchildren. And when I said, Monty, I want to do a podcast, he never hesitated, he never stuttered, and told me all the ideas of how we could pull it off. And so I want to thank him for his courage in that. So after our first podcast, I told my husband that nobody in broadcast journalism was threatened by my presence. Yeah. So, another initiative, through the work of our associate directors, we have launched a new ARE scholarship to help members who are sitting for the ARE cover test fees and the cost of study materials. We've also launched a legal helpline for members to have access to AI Florida's general counsel for legal questions for any legal questions they may have. Information about both these membership organizations are in your attendees packet. One more initiative I'd like to share with you is the I Can Be an Architect Challenge, where I have challenged all 13 components to conduct at least one architecture and education program in their component. For those that funds may be an issue, the Florida Foundation has funds and resources and lesson plans to help you launch that. And also, if you haven't submitted it that we can share and highlight it, please do so. We'd like to share the great programs from the Gingerbread House Project in Northwest to the Black Architects in the Making in Miami. So there's some great programs. I want to share and highlight them. So the next initiative that we're truly excited about, and I don't want to steal his thunder, so I invite Chris Bettinger from the Florida Masonry Association, who's going to make another exciting announcement. I promise to behave over here.
So I've been threatened repeatedly, and as recently as 2 minutes ago by Becky, 5 minutes, Chris, 5 minutes. So we're going to do our best, and I think she's over here ready to ensure it. This is a big deal for us as an association. You all are a bunch of troublemakers. Last year's convention, 6 times, by 6 different people, I was cornered about labor issues for masonry. Build a Safer Florida, all the things that you all want to do, the things we've been teaching and talking about, it's hard to do if you don't have the labor out there. We've been doing everything we can to get that done. We initiated something with your educational program, the hands-on training that Wendy and I have worked through along with your committee for professional development. And that's been a great, great success. That's educating you a little bit more about what the tradespeople are going through. We've recognized this as being an issue. So I walked away from last year's convention being the sitting chair of the Masonry Association, and I went to our first board meeting and I said, we're gonna blow it up. And everybody looked at me and said, really? And I said, yep, the AIA brought some things to light, and we really need to address those. So we are now, instead of the Masonry Association of Florida, we are now the Florida Masonry Association. It is a new venture. We took the Education Foundation, which focused on apprenticeship, and then we took our general membership for the Masonry Association, put them together to get rid of some redundancies for the 2 organizations, but also just make it that much more efficient. It's a 501(c)(3), so you all can donate whenever you'd like, and you'll get a tax benefit. So we're thinking about you in the long run there. It was really responding to the marketplace. So in terms of responding to the marketplace, it's how do we bring value to the market? So it's really easy to identify. The masonry industry, we have masons, we have block producers like myself. There's people in the state of Florida, everything is self-contained in block like no other state. Aggregates all the way through finished product and delivery on site. So there's a lot of people involved. The next thing is the design community, the architects and engineers out there. I think we do a pretty good job with you all, and I'm very proud of our relationship, and I know the AIA folks that we've worked with are very proud of it. So we're really happy about how that's gone. And then along with that, the construction community, general contractors, related trades. So what's the value we're going to bring to those folks with this new organization? I think if you really look at it, and we were being honest, excuse me, I'm used to walking around too, so if I hit that mic about a dozen times, it wouldn't surprise me. But it's peace of mind. So what does peace of mind equate to? It's basically that we want to specify masonry with confidence. We want you to be able to specify it, and with that, you know that there's going to be quality workmanship. You know that there's going to be labor to do the work, which is a big issue. That was what happened last year. There was a project in Pensacola that did not have a very competitive bid situation with masons. And we had to address that because we want your specifications to stick. We feel that masonry is the best one out there, and it was really important that we stress that. And all those things lead to competitive pricing. More people are bidding, better labor, all those different things, the work we do with you to develop good specifications, that all leads to competitive pricing. So that's basically where we're at with it. So we landed on pre-apprenticeship. Now, I've dealt with Beverly last year talking about this. I've talked to Rhonda, and we're going to talk a lot about what we talked about with Rhonda. I've had a chance to speak to Elizabeth a little bit, and Adam, and I think this has become a priority, and we're really appreciative for that. So the pre-apprenticeship is going to follow the North Carolina model, and that's the Masonry Contractors Association. What block is in Florida, brick is in the Carolinas. There's brick everywhere. And they have a program that has currently 800 high school kids in a pre-apprenticeship program. So typical apprenticeship is they have 3 years when they come out of high school, and then they're placed as a journeyman, or not a journeyman, but a certified mason, and then they go through journeyman practice. With the Carolina program, they have 800 kids go through on a yearly basis. They come out of high school with their first year apprenticeship completed, and they're starting at wages between $18 and $30 an hour. So we're getting people out there, giving them a career chance. Not everyone is a college kid. And when I say that, they're just as intelligent as anyone else, but they like hands-on. They like the physicality. They like those different things. Out of those 800, about 10% on average end up as masons in the field. So if you think about that, if we were to achieve the same thing here, that's a pretty big influx of labor out there that would only do nothing but help our market. A large number enter construction-related fields, including architecture and engineering. The masons are very strong partners, and they adopt a school as they go through. So this is their day they had, and there was 800 kids at this event. And I got to tell you, it was sort of overwhelming. I'll go through some of the slides, school bus after school bus. They had masonry competitions. That's them setting up. They had over 60 different booths that you can see those tent tops with different vendors supporting them. It is nothing more exciting than seeing a bunch of kids excited about an opportunity or a future. And really, it does benefit us as an industry. So we're really excited about that. And then it was a decision about, about how do we take it the next step. In developing that in a Florida model, we're starting with 7 markets: Jacksonville, Orlando, Tampa and Hillsborough area, Tallahassee, Pensacola, Southeast Florida, and Southwest Florida. In this program, we went to the Department of Career Technical Education. Rhonda and Becky attended that meeting with Kevin O'Farrell, thank you very much. He is the Director of Education, and they latched onto this because they understand Florida has all this growth everyone talks about. People need safe places to live. All these dynamics came together really nicely in the conversation. So in terms of looking at it, what was really positive was they liked the multi-level support. So we have masons willing to adopt a school. I knew a big initiative for the AIA has always been education and exposure for your industry and all the things it does. All the speakers up to this point have talked about that. So they bought into it hook, line, and sinker. They've been a huge partner for us. We're in the middle of developing the curriculum. Essentially what it's going to do, it's going to have producer and associate members from the Masonry Association participate. I represent Oldcastle. Here I'm the Masonry Association. I get paid for Oldcastle. And we're stepping up because we feel an opportunity to bring labor into our plants and a number of different things in a related industry, and we know how it'll build us. The AIA is going to step up and help us also, and we are thrilled to death about that. I had the opportunity to speak to your board in, I think it was April, and we discussed this real quick outline about what we want to accomplish. And essentially, what we're going to do with the AIA Florida is we're asking that we have monthly classroom discussions with the kids in each market. So we're looking for an architect in each market to come in. We're going to have a standardized presentation, which is going to have a 40-minute window of a standard message. Then we're going to have a 10-minute personalized presentation. In a perfect world, I'd love to have the architect to design that school, bring it up on the screen and say, you're sitting in this classroom, okay? We want them to talk about all different issues, and we want interaction. We want to make masonry and construction and let them understand it's just not out there killing yourself in a job. It's actually a career. I can tell you a number of masons that did not graduate from high school because they did not like the classroom application or world, and each one is a multimillionaire because they got the right fit and they exploited it. Just like all of you have the right fit for your career, you're able to exploit it and make the best of it. So in terms of the Florida messaging, Rhonda and I talked about it. We bounced a few things around, and we want to go from design development all the way through the finish. We're talking about September through May. These quick presentations, we're going to be developing them, working on that. We're going to need all of your interaction. We're going to have a meeting later on this weekend, I'll talk about in a moment, to have everyone come in and just have an open discussion and a jump-off point. But you can see the subjects we're talking about. It's the importance of architecture, the importance of quality construction, the important role that the trades play and masonry. If anyone consults and talks about wood framing, I will hunt you down and kill you, okay? In terms of the presentation, so in the packet, we have this brochure, which you'll see here. There's a QR code. There's a registration site set up if you want to be involved and you can't make the meeting we're going to have on Saturday. By all means, register for that. That would be fantastic. There's the QR code. If you'd love to talk to us on Saturday, July 20th at 8:30 in Ponce 3, we're going to have an open discussion about the program. I'm not going to throw a bunch of slides and lecture. I want to hear the feedback from all of you as far as what you think is vital, how it promotes the AIA because you're a big partner in it, and how it promotes the industry that we're looking at. I don't know how close I was to 5 minutes, but they didn't get the hook or the tranquilizer dart out, so I think I'm doing okay. Thank you all very much. This is a partnership that we value a great deal. My background is in architecture. This is coming home to me. I love smoking cigars and punching Mason's arm in those meetings, but I also enjoy these meetings a great deal. So thank you all. Rhonda, thank you for your partnership in this, and we're looking forward to really making something out of this. So thank you all.
So, Chris, we absolutely appreciate the partnership with the Masonry and all the support and sponsorship and continued partnership. So I would like to extend our gratitude with a citation for your continued partnership and efforts to grow the pipeline of people entering architecture and construction career fields. This is for you.
Okay.
Thank you. So Chris has been a longtime supporter and sponsor and partner with AIA Florida. He was here long before I got here. The Masonry Game Show, if you have not done that, please do. It is so much fun and you absolutely learn so much. He sponsors our board dinner every year. At the April board, we had the option of, what do you want to do? We could throw axe throwing. And I'm thinking, oh, you're going to give a bunch of architects cocktails and then let them throw axes. I was a little bit scared.
They chose straight to the alcohol part.
The scary part was that 50% of the board voted to do the axe throwing. I just think he just couldn't pull it off. But thank you, Chris, for your many years of support. So now it is my distinct pleasure to introduce our kickoff speaker. His book, Why Architecture Matters, very much has supported and inspired part of the theme. I'm very excited to have Paul Goldberger address us this morning. He is the former architecture critic for The New Yorker and The New York Times, where his architecture criticism was awarded the Pulitzer Prize in 1984. He lectures around the country about architecture, design, historic preservation, and cities. Goldberger has taught at both Yale School of Architecture and the Graduate School of Journalism at the University of California, Berkeley, and currently holds the Joseph Urban Chair at the New School in New York City. Mr. Goldberger is the author of several books, notably Why Architecture Matters. In the addition to the Pulitzer, his writing has received many awards, including the National Building Museum's Vincent Scully Prize and the Medal of Honor of the New York Landmarks Preservation Foundation. Goldberger has served as an advisor to cultural and educational institutions on architecture, on architect selection and design, to organizations such as the Corcoran Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C., and the New York Public Library, emphasizing his commitment to shaping the architectural landscape. And it is with distinct pleasure I invite Mr. Goldberger to speak to us today.
Thank you very much, Rhonda, for those lovely, lovely words. It's a great pleasure to be here and to escape the northern heat that we are living through right now. And I especially appreciate the invitation to talk about why architecture matters, since it's a subject that I, like you, have spent my life trying to figure out and to communicate. And as your president so graciously reminded you, I've written a book that has that very title, Why Architecture Matters, which is more or less a series of observations on the theme of this conference, which is that architecture affects the quality of life. It's not just a distraction. It's not just a way for those of you in this room to earn a living. It's not just a subject for AIA seminars or for college lectures. As you know, and as many of you said so well in that video we saw just a few minutes ago, it shapes the world in which we're living, as fully as the natural world does. And as such, it has a deep and ongoing connection to everyone's life. Now, that's not news to anyone in this room, of course. Every one of you has, for a long time, been building your life around an understanding of the relationship between architecture and the rest of life. But the profession hasn't always been so good at communicating this idea, since it is, for some people, a confusing thought. Does architecture matter to most people? Why should it? And if it doesn't, is that the failure of the architecture profession itself, or of our society, of our culture, for not making people sufficiently appreciative of what architecture is, of what it can do, of how it connects to their daily lives? I'll get back in a moment to how I've tried to answer these questions in that book, but for now, let me say that as I thought about other ways in which we might approach the subject of how and why architecture matters, I thought about architects and the relationship they have to society in general, not to their clients, but to everyone else. So I decided I would start by Googling, do people respect architects? And I came up with a few interesting things. The first thing that came up at the top of the page was a posting entitled, "Why do people think architects are rich?" which provoked an interesting online discussion about whether they actually are rich. The consensus, which will not surprise any of you, was that they are not. The next link that I turned up was called How to Talk to Your Architect. And it was on an MSN.com real estate site. The most memorable line from that statement, from that conversation rather, online, was the statement that, and I quote, architects are sometimes not good listeners. I then came across another blog posting, this one from some guy's personal blog, entitled "Architects Get No Respect," in which he explained his own career as an architect by saying that he'd pretty much bluffed his way through it, mainly by delivering attractive drawings, dressing well, and learning to speak the language of business to his clients, seasoned with just the right amount of architect's lingo. Study up on how to be a salesman, this blog went on. Now let me give you something from a rather better blog than that one that also turned up on that same Google search. This one from a blog I'd encountered before, entitled "Life of an Architect." The writer offered his top 10 reasons for being an architect. I think it probably came from the days of the David Letterman show. And they're worth listing because he made some curious choices. The number one reason, he says, is because it's a lifestyle, not a job, by which I suspect he means that it emerges out of passions and interests that define you, something I suspect most of you in this room would agree with. The second reason, which is why this blog popped up on my Google search, is because people respect architects. Largely, he says, because they are perceived to be ethical and not scurrilous like lawyers. His third reason was that the nature of the job is constantly evolving, which I think we can all agree is true enough. He correctly understood that this gives us constant stimulation and makes it impossible to coast in an architecture career for very long. Then came freedom of artistic expression and being your own boss, and then the euphoria, as he put it, of seeing your ideas realized in built form. After that, by now we're down to reason number 7, he said it's worth being an architect because we can positively impact people's lives. After that came 3 others. The notion that experimentation is expected in architecture, that architects often live long and have long-lasting careers, and finally, the wide range of options within the profession. All of these make sense, but how come the notion of positively impacting people's lives is all the way down that list as number 7? I don't want to be too hard on this blogger because he is obviously thoughtful and intelligent. But I wonder if this is part of the problem here, that too many architects think that the impact architecture has on people's lives is a perfectly nice but very secondary part of what architecture is. It's like saying the making of form is primary and what social impact it has is secondary. Now, those of you who've read things I've written over the years know that I'm hardly indifferent to form, and that it's not possible to write meaningfully about a building without engaging in at least some issues of aesthetics. Without an aesthetic component, architecture means vastly less, and therefore it matters vastly less. But still, rare is the building in which aesthetics are ultimately more important than social impact. For most buildings, social impact is primary, and the making of form is secondary. In fact, I'd go further and say that in those special buildings in which aesthetics are overwhelmingly important, the buildings that quite properly define architectural history and change the way we perceive the world, buildings like, to take one obvious example, Frank Gehry's Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao, Spain. Well, for such buildings, the aesthetics are the social impact. In other words, it is because of the aesthetics, because of the nature of the form, that the building affects people's lives as it does. Aesthetics and social impact here are not separate and distinct things. The design is the impact. But such situations are rare. They're great moments in architecture, and we should cherish them, but it is in the nature of architecture that everything is not and cannot be that kind of moment. Because architecture needs to provide a civilized background for our lives, and not only to provide us with occasional emotional highs like this building. I'll come back to these general thoughts in a moment, but before I do, I want to look around where we are now. Not in this actual room, but in the building it's a part of. And say that if you can't figure out why architecture matters when you were at the Breakers, then you're never going to figure it out. Because this building exemplifies what architecture exists to do, which is to add an emotional component to the practical necessities of building, and to do something more than keep us out of the rain, or in this case, the sun, or whatever. Now, hotels are, by definition, something other than a necessity, since we don't live in them, and most of us don't work in them, especially in the case of a resort like this one, as opposed to, say, a Motel 6. They are places that we associate with having a good time, with relaxation, with pleasure. So we come to them already prepared for an emotional component, you might say. Indeed, if you came to the Breakers and found it ugly or even boring, you would feel cheated in some way. We want the architecture to facilitate the joy that we hope to experience when we're here. And it does, thanks to Schultz and Weaver, the New York architects who designed this building and so many others, and who knew what they were doing. They understood that they were creating an experience, and that they were giving people a level of grandeur that they would not expect to find in their daily lives, and that at least part of their job was to engage in fantasy, to give people who came to this building a fantasy experience that would somehow engage and uplift them. The paradox of hotels, if I can stay on this subject for just another moment or two, is that they need to feel like home and like the opposite of home at the same time. We want them to give us the comforts of home, to make us feel nurtured and cared for. And yet that is never, of course, enough, since unless your home happens to be a palace, you also expect a great hotel to be nothing like home at all. It should transcend the associations you have with home and take you into another world, a world of elegance and sophistication, a world that shows you a whole other way to live. When a hotel is designed, or rather, when a hotel is doing what it should, it can make you feel that it was designed for you and you alone, even as it is filled with activity and energy of dozens, maybe hundreds of other people, each of whom is also feeling that the place was made just for them. That's another part of the paradox. A great hotel is a celebration of private life and public life at the same time. It's where the intimate joys of privacy and the exhilarating pleasures of community come together. Now, it takes a lot of different things to make that work, of course, but it starts, obviously, with architecture and design. We know what a hotel looks like before we've met anyone at the reception desk or tasted the food or taken a swim in the pool. The design of a hotel carries as much of this contradictory burden of making us feel at home and at the same time putting home out of mind entirely. If the look of a hotel is too strange, it can be stressful and off-putting. But if it's too familiar, it will not transport us anywhere worth going at all. And so it is with the Breakers, which is exotic, but not too exotic. Familiar in a sense it has some connection to other great traditional hotels of its time, but is not identical to any of them. and also being grand but welcoming at the same time. And managing, I think, that difficult trick of caring for us and inspiring us, of making us feel the calm of contentment and the thrill of the exotic at the same time. It has dignity and it has exuberance. Not a lot of buildings are good enough to project both of these qualities at the same time. Now, neither dignity nor exuberance is exactly the kind of thing that you can measure quantitatively. There's no metric for them, and certainly no metric for the unusual and rare combination of these two qualities in the same building. But part of what I'm trying to say this morning is that it is things like this that can make architecture matter, because these are the things that cause us to react emotionally to buildings. Of course, they also need to satisfy practical needs. That should go without saying, although it needs to be said anyway, because the value of architecture to society can be as compromised by those who deny practical needs as by those who think practical needs are all there is. To say that a building has a kind of emotional component, and that in the case of a hotel, that emotional component is a kind of exotic fantasy, is not ever to suggest that that is all it is. One of my favorite lines, I wish I could remember who said it, and I'm not actually trying to take credit for it, although I wish I could, is, "It takes a lot of reality to make a fantasy." And if that's true of, say, the movies, it is also true of architecture. In the case of the Breakers, the reality is in structure, because the building needs to stand up. But it is also in the internal, practical, functional aspects of the building. If nothing is organized properly, if the rooms are terrible, if you're always confused, if the back of the house isn't designed to work, well, then the reality has failed, and as a result, the fantasy will probably fail too, or at least be severely compromised. Now, I didn't really come here just to talk about the Breakers, but I'm going to say two more things about what makes it work as architecture, which is how it relates to the rest of Palm Beach. It relates first as a landmark. It's been here for a very long time, and people expect to see it as much as they expect to see the ocean and the boulevards lined with palm trees. It's an anchor in both time and space. In time, because it was here before we were, and we expect it will be here after we were gone. And space, because people in Palm Beach quite literally discuss locations as either north or south of the Breakers. Now, I'm not quite sure I would call it the Eiffel Tower of Palm Beach, but maybe the Empire State Building, say, a kind of marker. And the meaning of every work of architecture is shaped, at least in part, by its context. No work of architecture is a pure object. You can't talk about the Breakers without talking about Palm Beach, so I'm going to do that for just a second. What I value most about Palm Beach is actually not the Breakers, and neither is it any one single house, despite the amazing things here. And it is not even Palm Beach's foundational architect, Addison Meisner, wonderful though he was. It's something quite different, which is the fact that although you wouldn't know it if you went out the front door of this hotel, you can walk in this city. You not only can walk, but you want to, or at least I want to when I'm here. Palm Beach has a real core, and while I know that Worth Avenue is not your typical small-town Main Street, and Royal Palm Way is not your typical boulevard, it is quite wonderful to walk here. It is also wonderful to ride a bike here. It is wonderful to go along Lake Trail and Royal Poinciana Way. The fabric of a real town, a real city, is here at a scale that is appealing and comfortable. That is something that, as you all know, is not all that common in the state of Florida. There's a density to Palm Beach that makes it feel like something more than a suburban beach community and something more than a typical resort town. But neither is it a place of enormous buildings that change the scale. The one enormous building that Palm Beach does have is, of course, the Breakers, which serves as an anchor for the whole place. It's a reminder that sometimes the best things are the exceptions, the things that break the rules. The lucky thing is that Palm Beach somehow managed to have one very large building as good as this, and not a dozen of them. Palm Beach would be diminished if the Breakers did not exist, but it would be diminished much more if there were hotels like this up and down the entire beach. If that had been the way Palm Beach had developed, it would have looked something like Atlantic City in its heyday. Not the awful Atlantic City of the casino age, but the genteel Atlantic City of 100 years ago. But if you study that city, Atlantic City as it was in its best time, it was still not much more than a facade along the beachfront, a row of high buildings behind which there was not very much at all. Certainly nothing that suggested a vibrant community. It was a row of high-rise resort hotels for tourists, not a place for residents except those who were employed to serve the tourists. Now, Palm Beach is also a resort, but an unusual kind of resort because its resort population does not consist primarily of hotel guests, but of people interested in and committed to this community. It's a place where people live, not just go so they can have vacations. Now, if you took that last sentence out of context, it would seem a bit silly, because we all know that while Palm Beach is a place in which people live, it is not exactly a place in which a particularly wide range of people live. And I doubt that many of us in this room this morning could afford to live here. I certainly could not. And Palm Beach could not exist without all kinds of satellite places off the island that exist to support it. In this sense, Palm Beach has less in common with its near neighbors in Florida than it does with places elsewhere like Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard and Southampton and East Hampton and Aspen and Montecito and so forth. Trophy towns, places that have become so desirable that they no longer are diverse communities. In all these communities, families who've lived there for generations and built and shaped the community often find that they, and certainly their children, can no longer afford to live there. And as we know, very few people who earn their living in any of these places can afford to live there. For this reason, I don't entirely mind the significant growth that's been happening in West Palm Beach between here and the airport, although I admit that since I don't live here, I don't have to brave the traffic that it has caused, which is only going to get worse. The architecture is uneven, although some of it is not bad, and there's at least some limited attempt at urbanism, at making it a place in which people will have some incentive to walk and not always get in their cars. But my point here is just to say that all this development across the lake has at least allowed growth to take place in this general region, which is necessary without creating violent change and disruption to the physical form of the island of Palm Beach itself. You could say that West Palm Beach is the pressure valve that helps preserve Palm Beach. And if you look at it that way and look at Palm Beach and West Palm Beach as a kind of collective ecosystem, then perhaps the West Palm Beach growth is not so bad. Anyway, I know I've gone off on a little bit of a tangent here, and let me get away from the Breakers itself and Palm Beach and get back to our real subject, which is why architecture matters in a broader sense. As I said at the beginning of this talk, I wrote a book a few years ago with that title, which was an attempt to figure out what underlies a life spent thinking about and writing about architecture. to try to put in words all the ideas that I've taken for granted most of my life, and the ideas that I want to explain to you in the next few minutes this morning. It's not that long a book, but as you know, or as you remember from that old line, if I had more time, I would have written you a shorter letter. It took a long time to write. It's not a book that fits into any normal category of architecture book. It's not a history. It's not a fancy coffee table book with glossy color photographs either. And it's not a guide to architectural styles or an architectural dictionary. My view is if you want to know what constitutes Georgian or classical or Gothic architecture, or what a pilaster or pediment is, well, you can always look it up. I don't remember myself always what the difference is between an architrave and an entablature. That's what those other books are, or for, or Google, for that matter. What I wrote this book for is the stuff that you can't look up. The feelings, the emotions, the personal connections we feel toward architecture, the way it affects us. I'm sure all of you have heard at one time or another the celebrated quote from Winston Churchill, who said that we shape our buildings, and afterwards, our buildings shape us. I think that I was trying, in the end, to explain that Churchill quote, to figure out why and how this is so. How we shape our buildings, and how they, in turn, shape us. What makes one thing affect us one way, and another thing affect us another way. Why some things about your elementary school are more firmly etched into your consciousness than certain things about the office you work in every day as an adult. How buildings are not always the same as we remember them. How they, like we, change over time. And finally, how buildings work together to create a larger sense of place. Now, I know that architecture matters very much to me, and I think to all of you in this room, but however much we love in it and however much we believe in it, we should not claim that it can save the world. Great architecture is not bread on the table, and it is not justice in the courtroom. It affects the quality of life, yes, and often with an astonishing degree of power. But it does not heal the sick, teach the ignorant, or in and of itself sustain life. At its best, it can help to heal and teach by creating a comfortable and uplifting environment for these things to take place in. This is but one of the ways in which architecture, though it may not sustain life, can give the already sustained life meaning. When we talk about how architecture matters, it is important to understand that the way in which it matters, beyond, of course, the obvious fact of shelter, is the same way in which any kind of art matters, because it makes life better. Paradoxically, it's often the most mundane architecture that means the most to us. The roof over our heads, the random buildings that protect us from the rain and give us places to work and shop and sleep and be entertained. I don't focus entirely on buildings like these in this book, but I do talk about them because I don't buy the notion that there's such a thing as a clear line that can be drawn between serious architecture and ordinary buildings. A bicycle shed is a building. Lincoln Cathedral is architecture, wrote the art historian Sir Nicholas Pevsner. But so what? Both are buildings to me. Both are architecture. Lincoln Cathedral is a vastly more complex and profound work of architecture than the bicycle shed, and it was created with more noble aspirations. But each structure has something to say about the culture that built it. Each structure is at least of some interest visually, and each structure evokes certain feelings and emotions. There's much more to say about a great cathedral than a generic shed, but each helps shape our environment. Many of the architectural things we love best and care for most are, of course, not works of art at all. Vernacular architecture, the unself-conscious, ordinary architecture of the everyday landscape, which sometimes feels like an old ant, unsophisticated but with great natural wisdom, and deeply beloved for it. It's difficult not to cherish the tile-roofed white houses of the Mediterranean, or the shingled cottages of New England, or the brick commercial buildings of the main streets of Midwestern American cities. There's something in the way that human beings are designed that reacts well to some shapes and not others. And these time-tested vernaculars reflect not only climatic and cultural conditions in their areas, but they have inherently appealing shapes. What eye does not love a red-painted barn in a sloping meadow? It's both intrinsically attractive as a form and soothing as a symbol of comfortable, ordered life. So, too, is it with a row of Italian brownstones or a small Cape Cod cottage. But these things alone, wonderful as they are not enough. Great architecture is something else, something that takes us beyond the vernacular. It's no easier to say what makes a great work of architecture succeed as art than to say what makes a great painting or great music. Yet every so often come innovations so powerful that they force their way through and make us see the world differently. These changes may be small. The notion that art, even great art, creates epiphanies is more the stuff of overblown memoirs than real life. Rare is the life that is truly transformed by a single work of art. But art does change us through exhilaration, shock, and a heightened sense of possibility. And once we have felt these, we are no longer the same. Louis Kahn, the greatest American architect since Frank Lloyd Wright, used to speak of great art not as the fulfillment of a need. Need is just so many bananas, he said, he liked to say, but as the fulfillment of a desire. Desire, not need, leads to great art, Kahn said, but when artistic achievement is great enough, it becomes a new need. The world didn't need Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, Kahn said, until he wrote it. And after that, nobody who had ever heard it could conceive of the world without it. We began to need Beethoven, not because of an innate need to do so, but because Beethoven's own desire, manifested in his art, made it so. And as with the Fifth Symphony, the world was never again the same after Michelangelo's David, or Hamlet, or Picasso's Les Demoiselles d'Avignon, or The Wasteland. And so too with the pyramids or the Parthenon, or the Pantheon or Chartres Cathedral, and Jefferson's University of Virginia, and Frank Lloyd Wright's Unity Temple, and Le Corbusier's Villa Savoy, and the Seagram Building by Mies van der Rohe and Kahn's own Salk Institute, and 100 other great buildings that have expanded our sense of human possibility. When architecture is art, it does not escape the obligation to be practical, and its practical shortcomings should not be forgiven, at least not entirely. Yet neither should practical matters play a dominant role in making judgments. It's a little bit churlish to complain that Frank Lloyd Wright's houses leak, or that Le Corbusier's weather badly, or that Frank Gehry's might be difficult to construct, all of which may be true, but what of it? The leaky roof is not your problem or mine. And neither is it the fact that we might not wish to live in such a building ourselves. Le Corbusier's Villa Savoy, completed in 1929 in Poissy, outside of Paris, was the subject of angry exchanges between the architect and Madame Savoy, who considered the house uninhabitable, although she managed to live in it for more than a decade. Her discomfort is understandable, as was the anger toward Mies van der Rohe by Edith Farnsworth, who, like the Savoys, commissioned one of the great houses of the 20th century, and once living in it, found it woefully impractical. Now, the Savoys and Edith Farnsworth were unlucky because they had to live with a work of art at every moment, a nearly impossible task. The rest of us have the luxury of looking at these houses only when we want to. Now, some people, of course, are capable only of looking at houses in practical terms. When Philip Johnson's glass house, completed in 1949, was new, a pretentious woman who visited this then very shocking piece of modern architecture turned to Johnson and said, "Well, it's very nice, but I couldn't live here." "I haven't asked you to, madam," was Johnson's reply. Exactly. And if we're lucky enough to appreciate building X or building Y as a purely aesthetic experience, regardless of its usefulness, so much the better. Yes, the roof leaked in the Villa Savoy, but it didn't leak on you or me. And the glass walls of the Farnsworth house and its lack of screens did indeed make it exceedingly difficult to live in during the summer. But you and I were not trying to sleep there. I think that few great houses are uplifting works of art to the people who live in them. These people are simply too close. And because they are there at every moment, they have no choice but to think of comfort. The rest of us can think of challenge and of beauty and treat them as works of genius, which are often incompatible with the demands of daily life. We enjoy the freedom of adventures among masterpieces, to paraphrase Anatole France's definition of a critic's work, and keep in mind that the greatest joy of architecture is in the discovery of its ability to be art. The point I'm trying to make is that the notion of challenge is so closely bound to the experience of art that it presents a particular dilemma so far as architecture is concerned. For architecture is necessarily ill at ease, if not incompatible with it. If great art exists to challenge us rather than coddle us, then what of architecture's obligation to provide shelter and comfort? Unlike art or literature or music, architecture must protect us from the elements. It must in some way console us, for its job is to protect us. We cannot live with architecture as constant challenge, any more than we can think of James Joyce as escape reading for the beach, or treat John Cage as elevator music. Art demands attention, and architecture's constant presence in our lives makes constant attention to it impossible. That's true of every kind of architecture, from buildings that are designed only for comfort to ones designed mainly to challenge us. Everyday architecture gives us a license to ignore it, to think of it as a kind of background hum, to be noticed only when it's exceptionally big, exceptionally ugly, or exceptionally beautiful. Most of the architecture that surrounds us we barely see. In architecture, familiarity breeds often not contempt, but complacency. I suppose the Madame and Monsieur Savoy or Edith Farnsworth would have been happy to settle for complacency. It's no wonder that they were not happy. Even without leaky roofs and too much hot sun, it's difficult to live within a work of art every day of your life. The Savoys and Edith Farnsworth chose their architects and approved their plans, of course, but that's beside the point. It merely adds a level of irony to their distress. Owners of houses by Frank Lloyd Wright speak of feeling right's presence at every moment, and they're not talking about it in spiritual or ghostly terms. They mean that every aspect of their house is so powerfully shaped by right's aesthetic that they feel as if he's directing their movements and their feelings as they go about their daily lives. Most right owners are fiercely loyal to their houses, but it's not surprising that they seek a break from time to time from his relentless presence in their lives. Architecture that's been designed to be a constant presence in our lives can also raise expectations far too high, even if it does not create the anguish felt by the Savoys or Edith Farnsworth, or force itself unceasingly on us like Wright. It seems to dangle before us the promise of an ideal world, an aesthetic perfection that can all too easily be taken to feel like a salve for other wounds, and a promise of perfection in every aspect of life. It's not, of course, so. Perfect architecture does not make our lives perfect. The noblest architecture can sometimes do less for us than a siesta or an aspirin. The philosopher Alain de Botton wrote in his book, The Architecture of Happiness. Even if we could spend the rest of our lives in the Villa Rotunda or the glass house, we would still often be in a bad mood. I love that observation because it reminds us that even the very best architecture cannot fix everything. As I said a few minutes ago, I'm much more interested in what feelings a building evokes in us as we look at it or walk through it or live with it over time than I am about where that building fits into the history or theory of architecture. That's the reason the book Why Architecture Matters is arranged not chronologically, not in terms of styles or building types, but in terms of ways in which architecture affects us or ways in which we can think about it. The chapter titles make the point. Meaning, comfort, and symbol. Meaning, culture and symbol is the first, then challenge and comfort, which is about the constant tension in architecture between challenging us, as art should, and taking care of us, playing a kind of nurturing role that art does not have to do, but architecture does. And then architecture as object, which starts with the premise that we have to admit that whatever else a building is, it is still very much a thing, a physical object in the physical world. And how it looks still means a lot. And then architecture is space, since as you all know and think about every day, it is in the crafting of interior space, in the making of rooms, that the greatest achievements of many architects lie. Architecture and memory, which is one of my favorite parts of this book because it's the most personal. It talks about how each of us has our own formative memories of architecture, whether from childhood or adolescence or young adulthood. But we also have a shared cultural memory of architecture established through films and literature and art, and how the personal and shared memories play off against each other. My first memories of architecture were growing up in suburban New Jersey, and I know that the town in which I grew up played a critical role in establishing my own sense of things. My family's house, a sort of rambling, shingled house with a big gable and a round stone porch, certainly did, but so did the entire town. An unusual place because it has a football field right at its center as its symbolic heart, with the town hall and the library and the firehouse all arranged around it. You couldn't ask for a better introduction to the idea of civic symbols. Very different from growing up in a place where the center was a commercial strip with a Walmart. Later, The campus of Yale, where I went to school, affected me at least as much. And then, of course, my most important influence of all, New York, and the one that continues to affect my thinking about architecture because it is always changing. I've also been influenced by a place in which I've spent much of the summer for many years, the little town of Amagansett, part of East Hampton on eastern Long Island. And I should mention parenthetically that one of the things it's taught me is that sometimes, not in what's shown in this picture, but sometimes less building is better than more. And that in some circumstances, the best building can be no building. And how extraordinarily difficult is the challenge to maintain the integrity and nature of a special place without letting it fall over into cliche and become a parody of itself. That's what happened in places as conscientious and protective of their history as, say, Santa Fe, which sometimes feels like an Adobe theme park, or Nantucket, where the misguided belief that you respect history best by creating a law that requires everyone to imitate it seems to prevail. That's why I also have problems with the constant replication of East Hampton's old shingle-style architecture, not because I don't like that architecture, but because I do like it, and I don't want it to descend into triteness or parody. But neither, of course, can a beautiful village descend into chaos, which is the opposite risk. Letting everybody do whatever they want isn't the answer either. And sometimes, as I said a second ago, and this I know seems a little odd for an architecture critic to say, the best building is no building. In Florida, as in eastern Long Island and so many other parts of this country, there are many moments when I think the question is not what kind of architecture there should be on a particular piece of land, but whether there should be any architecture at all. There are times when we're discussing architectural issues and have already missed the point when the most urgent need is preserving land and nature and open space. In any case, to go back to my little fast march through this short book, after comes a chapter called Buildings and Time, which is not the same as architecture and memory. It's about how buildings themselves change over time, and so do our attitudes about them. In this section, I also talk a lot about historic preservation and about how so many buildings aren't understood in their own times, and even less in the times immediately thereafter. It often takes a generation or more for a building to find its proper place. And even then, future generations will see things differently. One of my favorite examples, and one that I use in the book, is on the campus of Yale in New Haven, Paul Rudolph's Art and Architecture building, now renamed Paul Rudolph Hall in the architect's honor, a building which, when it was finished in 1963, was briefly the hottest building in the country. It was the Bilbao of its time, you could say. And then it fell out of favor, rejected as too harsh, too tough, too brutalist, too unforgiving. The building was accorded so little respect that it was repeatedly trashed and altered badly, and was the victim of a fire, well, now 40 years ago. In any case, it began to look less and less as the architect had intended it, and then more recently, it was seen through the softer, more forgiving lens of history, and restored by Charles Gwathmey, who in fact had been a student of Paul Rudolph's. When reopened, it looked better than ever, and softer, and you realize it had never been quite as tough and mean as it was accused of being. The Yale Architecture building is just one of many sagas of a building attitude changing over time. Buildings change physically, and our attitudes toward them change. You see that in Florida. In many places, I can think of two in particular. where time has caused a huge shift in attitude. South Beach, the Art Deco district in Miami Beach, which was once a derelict neighborhood given up for lost. And the post-war modernist houses on the other coast in Sarasota, which was one of the most important places anywhere in the United States for the development of residential architecture in the 1950s. The Sarasota School, with, again, Paul Rudolph as its major but by no means only figure, was off the historical radar for a long time, during which several of its finest works were demolished. Now it is appreciated for the key period that it was, and its masterworks, those that survive, are generally protected, as Rudolph's great umbrella house, which you see here, recently restored. Anyway, to return to why architecture matters, that book ends with a chapter called Buildings and the Making of Place. And that's maybe the most important because it talks about foreground buildings and background buildings, and about how you can't really look at a building outside of its context, as I said earlier, and how context sometimes defines architecture, as I was saying earlier when we talked about the breakers in the context of Palm Beach, and how buildings never exist in isolation, how interdependent they are, and how the whole is always more than the sum of its parts. That's, I think, urbanism. The idea of urbanism condensed into one sentence is that the whole is more than the sum of the parts. Everything connects. Every building connects to the landscape, and every building connects to other buildings around it, and together they either make a successful place or they don't. If I've learned anything in my years of looking at buildings, it is that in a town or a city or a village, the street matters more than the building. Now that may seem like the second heretic statement an architecture critic could make. After all, I've already said that sometimes land matters more than buildings, and now I'm saying that streets can matter more than individual buildings too. But you can have a wonderful civilized place with a lot of decent but not great buildings working together, the way they do in the Art Deco district of South Beach, Miami Beach, or indeed in much of Palm Beach. And conversely, you can't make a civilized town if the buildings do not work together, even if some of them are truly great. Buildings in a town or a village are a wonderful metaphor for the meaning of community, because they all depend on each other, and together they can create a whole that none of them could achieve on its own. So this, in the end, is why architecture matters. Architecture is about the making of place and the making of memory. Architecture gives us joy if we are lucky, and it gives us satisfaction and comfort. But it also connects us to our neighbors, since the architecture of a town or a city is the physical expression of common ground. It's what we share, if only because the architecture of community is one of the few forms of experience that everybody partakes in, the sharing of place. And architecture is also an expression of time, in an age when we are all too often bereft of a sense of time, bereft of the feeling that some things that surround us have been there for a long time and will be there for a long time to come. And perhaps most important of all, in an age when so many of our contacts are virtual, when we live in an age of the virtual world of computers, architecture is a constant reminder of the urgency, of the meaning, and of the value of the real. Buildings are not just inanimate objects. They are occasions for human contact, and they are shapers of human contact, which makes them a living part of our world. Thank you.